My name is Nathan Cole. I had just finished my final exam at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The sky was steel gray, and the wind slapped my face as I walked back to my apartment on Langdon Street. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message from my mother, asking if I had found a summer job yet. I didn't answer. She had sent the same message every day that week, and every day I had nothing new to say. I crossed University Avenue and walked past a stretch of old stone buildings. That was when I noticed the flyer posted on the side of a rusted utility box. It was taped carelessly, flapping slightly in the wind. Yellow paper, large bold black letters. The kind of thing you barely glance at, except one word jumped out at me. Caretaker. Stopped. It was not a word you saw often. Below it, there was a number scrawled by hand. No company name, no job description. Just one line under the number, one night only. Cash. It should have set off every warning bell in my head, but something about it stopped me cold. I tore the flyer off and shoved it into my backpack. That evening I sat on my mattress, the flyer smoothed out beside me. My roommate Evan was out, the apartment silent except for the dull hum of the fridge. I stared at the number. Then I called. 3 rings. Then a voice. You saw the paper. That means you are interested. Meet me at 1320 East, Washington Avenue. Midnight. Bring no one. The line went dead. I almost laughed. I thought it was a prank. But something about the voice made my chest tighten. It had a cadence that felt ancient, measured, like whoever it belonged to did not speak often. I should have blocked the number and forgotten about it. Instead, I found myself stepping off the number 6 bus an hour later and walking up East Washington Avenue with the wind at my back and the streetlights flickering above me. The address led me to an iron gate, black and towering, wrapped in curling ivy. Behind it stretched rows of leaning headstones and dead trees. A cemetery, hidden in plain sight, in the heart of Madison. There was no sign, no name, only an intercom, built into the stone pillar by the gate. I pressed the button. The gate clicked open without a word. I walked in. There was no light except for a faint orange glow at the far end of the gravel path. It led to a small house, just one story, slanted roof, front porch with a crooked rocking chair that creaked slightly in the wind. Standing by the door was a man in a dark coat. He watched me approach with the stillness of a photograph. Nathan Cole, he said. Thank you for coming. His face was pale, not sickly, but devoid of life. He had dark circles under his eyes and his lips barely moved when he spoke. You will not be here long, but the night will not pass quickly. He opened the door and motioned for me to step inside. The house smelled like wood smoke and something older, something sour. The walls were lined with books and framed portraits whose faces had been scratched out. I sat down on a wooden chair near the fireplace. My name is Howard Ellis. I have cared for this place longer than I care to remember. I must leave now, for one night. Just one. There is no one else. Only you. Why me? I asked. He looked at me with eyes like slate. Because you answered. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a thick stack of $20 bills. $2,000. All yours now. You may leave when the sun rises. I should have left then. Money or not, something was wrong. But my hand closed around the envelope. He handed me a worn leather notebook. Everything you need is in here. Read it carefully. Miss nothing. This place does not forgive carelessness. I tried to ask another question, but he was already standing. I leave now. Do not follow me. Do not look for me. Whatever happens, do not open the red door. Red door. He did not answer. He disappeared into the dark with footsteps that made no sound. I was alone. The house was silent, too silent. I opened the notebook. Its pages were yellowed and filled with ink that looked almost like it had been burned into the paper. The first page was a list. Instructions for the caretaker 1. Lock the gate at 12:30 a.m. sharp. Do not miss this time point to light the lantern in the watchtower and keep it lit. 3. If anyone knocks on the door before sunrise, do not answer, no matter what they say. 4. Avoid looking at the statue in the northeast corner. If you do, look away slowly. 5. If you hear your name whispered from the woods, cover your ears and do not respond. 6. Never, under any circumstances, open the red door. I felt a chill as I read the last one again. There was a red door in the hallway, faded, with peeling paint, and a brass handle. It looked like it had not been opened in years. I turned the lock on the front gate at exactly 12:30. The sound of the latch echoing down the gravel path felt final, like a coffin closing. I climbed to the watchtower next to the house and lit the lantern. It hissed to life, casting a flickering glow over the gravestones. Then I waited, stared out the window, and watched as a fog began to creep in from the trees. It spread fast, swallowing the gravestones one by one, until the entire cemetery vanished into a sea of gray dot. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, then louder, 3 knocks, then silence, then again, 3 more. I held my breath. Then came a voice, "Please, let me in. I am so cold." The voice was a child's, a girl. She sounded no older than 6. My hand moved to the doorknob, but something stopped me. The notebook, "Do not answer, no matter what they say." I stepped back. The knocking continued. Then the voice changed. It was no longer a child. It was deeper, sharper. "You do not belong here, Nathan Colai." Backed away from the door. The lantern in the watchtower flickered. Then it went out. I ran to relight it, and that was when I saw it. Standing just inside the gate, a figure, tall, motionless, dressed in black, its face covered by a mask. The gate was locked, but it was inside. I did not move. I barely breathed. The figure stood motionless in the fog near the front gate. It wore what looked like a black morning suit from another century. Its arms hung at its sides, too long for its body. The face was obscured by a porcelain white mask, with no mouth. Only hollow, black eyes stared in my direction. It was not supposed to be there. The gate was locked. I had locked it. My heart pounded as I backed down the tower stairs, gripping the edge of the lantern. I relit the flame with shaking fingers. The instant the light came back to life, I looked toward the gate again. The figure was gone. I scanned the fog but saw nothing. Then the lantern flickered again, and something knocked at the window behind me. I turned slowly. There was no one there, only the fog pressing against the glass like fingers. I checked the notebook again. No mention of masked figures. No mention of windows. I locked the watchtower door behind me and returned to the main house. The clock on the wall showed 1:14 a.m. Only 5 hours remained. The silence outside was heavy, like the cemetery was holding its breath. I poured myself a cup of water in the kitchen and sat by the fireplace. That was when I noticed the portrait on the far wall. It had not been there before. I was sure of it. The frame was old, the glass cracked. The image was hand-painted, not a photograph. It showed the same house I was standing in, but in the foreground was a man, wearing the same black suit, with the same porcelain white mask. I crossed the room and examined it closely. There was a date scratched faintly into the corner. A low creak sounded behind me. I turned quickly. The red door was open a crack. I had not touched it. I rushed over and slammed it shut, then locked it with the brass bolt. The metal was ice cold beneath my fingers. When I turned around again, the portrait was gone. The wall was empty. I backed away, slowly, heart racing. Then I heard the whispering. It came from the woods outside, like dozens of voices all speaking at once, but none clear. I clamped my hands over my ears, just as the notebook instructed. The sound did not stop. It was inside my head now. "Nathan, come outside, Nathan. We see you, Nathan. We know your name. I dropped to the floor and pressed my back to the door of the red room, my ears ringing. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I stood up and checked the clock again. 2:03 a.m. I needed to distract myself. Anything to take my mind off the impossible. I opened a drawer in the old desk and found a yellowed map of the cemetery grounds. It had been hand-drawn, with strange symbols marking certain graves. One section was labeled simply, the Row A Straight path at the northern edge of the grounds. The rest of the cemetery was filled with scattered plots, but this path was perfectly aligned. 7 headstones, all in a row. The margin of the map held a handwritten note if the names ever change. "You must leave." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I had to see them. I lit a second lantern, heavier but brighter, and stepped outside again. The fog had thickened into a white wall, barely letting me see more than a few feet ahead. The notebook had said nothing about leaving the house, but it had also said to follow the rules exactly. I felt the weight of the warning settle deep into my chest. Do not ignore sins. I followed the gravel path north, checking the map every few steps. The fog deadened every sound. Even my footsteps felt muffled. After what felt like 10 minutes, I found it. The row. 7 headstones, each identical, perfectly spaced. The grass in front of them was shorter than elsewhere, trimmed, maintained. The names were etched in granite: Michael, Reeds, Samantha, Dale Christopher, Hunt Eleanor, Voss Daniel, Clara Becca, Marsh Nathan, Cole. My hand dropped the lantern. I stepped back. My legs buckled. I fell hard into the grass. My name was on the 7th stone, not someone else, not a coincidence. My name, first and last, same spelling, same size as the rest. I scrambled to my feet and stared at the stone. The date of death was blank, freshly carved. Something moved behind me. I turned and saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of the lantern's light. Not the masked one this time. A woman, dressed in gray, hair hanging wet and tangled across her face. Her head tilted slowly to the side, as if examining me. Then she spoke, not with her mouth, but inside my head. "You should not be here, Nathan. You were not invited. You are not buried." She stepped forward. I ran. I ran harder than I had ever run in my life. The fog closed around me. I nearly tripped twice before seeing the warm glow of the house ahead. I threw open the door and slammed it behind me. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it, except the red door. It was wide open now. No light came from beyond it, only darkness that felt solid. I turned to run back outside, but stopped. The masked figure was at the gate again, this time closer, inside the cemetery walls, and this time I saw its hands. They were not hands, they were claws. I stood paralyzed in the narrow hallway, caught between the red door, yawning open behind me, and the masked figure standing at the gate. Its pale face seemed to shine in the dark like bone under moonlight. The lantern in my hand flickered. The air felt thicker, colder. I had to move. The red door was open now, and the darkness spilling from it felt deeper than night. It was not just the absence of light. It was something heavier, something that reached back. I held my breath and stepped forward. One step, then another. Beyond the red door was a staircase, not steep, but narrow, made of stone that looked damp and uneven. The walls pressed in on both sides, rough with patches of mold. I should have turned back, but I descended. The further I went, the more the air changed. It no longer smelled like damp wood or old paper. It smelled like rot, not the sharp kind, from spoiled food, but something older, something buried. The stairwell opened into a room. Low ceiling, no furniture. The walls were covered in carvings, not words, not symbols, faces. Dozens of faces carved directly into the stone, each one distinct. All of them had their mouths open in silent screams. I turned to leave. The door was gone. There was only a wall behind me now. No handle, No hinge, just stone. I pounded my fist against it, but the sound was swallowed. I screamed, and even that barely echoed. Then I heard breathing, not mine, slow, wet breaths, just behind me. I turned. The faces on the walls were watching me. Their stone eyes had moved. I stumbled back and tripped over something soft, something that gave under my foot. A pile of clothes, neatly folded, a suit, a pair of shoes, a leather notebook identical to mine, but older, covered in mold. On top of the pile was a small photograph. I picked it up. It showed a man standing in front of the red door, smiling, holding a lantern. It was me, same jacket, same face, same broken lantern in one hand. I dropped the photo and backed into the farthest corner of the room. The breathing got louder. Then a voice came from the wall. You broke the seal, you opened the door, you are the key. Covered my ears. The faces moved. Their mouths opened wider. Their eyes stretched in agony. You were never supposed to leave. You were chosen, you answered. The air grew colder. My breath came out in white clouds. Then the light from the lantern died, and I was not alone. Something touched my shoulder. Not a hand, not skin. It was smooth, cold like porcelain. I turned, barely able to see. The masked figure stood inches from me, its head tilted to the side, slow and unnatural. Then it lifted one long arm and pointed to the wall. One of the carved faces was missing, a blank space where a face had once been, and I knew it was waiting for mine. I stumbled backward into the center of the room and screamed at the top of my lungs. Let me out, let me out. The figure did not move. The room began to shake. From above, something cracked. Dust rained down. Then a door appeared where none had been. A plain wooden door, glowing faintly. I ran to it, twisted the knob, and threw myself through. I landed hard on the floor of the hallway. The red door slammed shut behind me and vanished, gone. No seam, no frame, just wall. The house was silent again, but different. The clock no longer worked. The fireplace had gone out. The portraits were gone, and outside the window, the cemetery had changed. The fog was gone, but every headstone had turned. They now faced the house. All of them. I stood slowly. My legs shook, but I made it to the watchtower again. I had to relight the lantern. I had to follow the rules. But when I reached the top, the lantern was already lit, and sitting in the chair was me, or something wearing my face. It smiled. Its eyes were all black. Then it spoke. We were waiting. Nathan, and you finally opened the door. I staggered backward. The thing in the chair grinned, wider than any human mouth should have. Its lips peeled back over perfect teeth that looked too white, too sharp. It stood slowly, hands at its sides, the same as mine, the same shape, same scar above the right eyebrow, same chipped molar when it smiled. It was not a copy, it was me, but hollow. I turned and ran down the watchtower stairs 2 steps at a time, nearly falling. I burst through the door at the base and out into the cemetery. The grass felt colder than before, damp like it had just rained, though the sky was dry. The graves had changed again. Now they were closer, not physically, not in space, but they felt closer, like they had shifted while I was not watching. Every headstone faced me. Every name was scratched out. Only one remained, mine. And beneath my name, a date had been carved since I last checked. Tonight's date. I stumbled away, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I made it back to the house, locked the door, and checked the clock. Still frozen. 3:33 a.m., the exact same time as when the lantern had gone out. I ripped the clock from the wall. No batteries, no gears, only one thing inside the frame. A folded piece of paper. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was another page from the notebook, but this one had been torn out, written in a more frantic hand, not the calm ink from earlier pages. These were scratched, dark lines that had pressed nearly through the page. If the copy sees you, it will not stop. If it reaches you, it will wear your body. If it wears your body, you will become the next mask. I dropped the paper. Then came the sound. Footsteps on the porch. Deliberate, slow. A knock at the door. Just one. Then silence. I froze. The notebook had warned me never to open the door for anyone. Not for voices. Not for help. Not even for law enforcement. But it had never said anything about someone who looked like me. Then came the second knock. I backed away. The windows were covered now. I had not closed them. The curtains had drawn themselves, and the mirrors there had been 2 in the hallway were now gone. Just empty hooks on the wall. As I walked past, I saw something move in the reflection of the black television screen. My copy, standing behind me. I spun around. No one. The screen behind me flickered, then turned to static. Then an image. A room filled with rows of chairs. An audience. Every person in the crowd wore my face. They stared at the screen, and the screen showed me. I unplugged the television. It stayed on. The voices began again. This time not from outside, from inside the walls. Nathan, Nathan, Nathan. The voices did not overlap. They were in unison, like a choir without breath. I covered my ears again. The sound went deeper, into my bones. Then came the bell. Just one long, metallic ring from deep within the cemetery. Then another dot, then 5 dot, then 13. I ran to the drawer where I had stored the extra canisters of salt. They were gone. The drawer was empty, except for one item, a mask, white porcelain. I lifted it slowly. On the inside, scratched by something sharp, was a single word. Yours. I dropped it. It cracked on the floor. Then I heard the front door creak. Open. Not slam, not burst. It creaked, like it belonged to whatever had opened it. I turned the corner. No. One was there, only footprints, bare feet, the same size as mine, trailing dirt and salt across the floor. They led toward the basement. The red door was gone, but the path remained. A new door had appeared. Black wood, iron hinges, no handle. It swung open as I approached. Inside was not a staircase. It was a tunnel. Dirt walls, wooden beams holding the ceiling like a mine shaft. The air smelled like sulfur and dried blood. I stepped inside. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I already knew there were none. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew warmer. Then I saw the first body, propped against the wall, dressed in a caretaker's suit, head tilted at an impossible angle, a porcelain mask shattered on the ground beside it. I stepped around him and moved deeper. Then I saw the second body, also in a suit. This one, older, a name stitched into the pocket. Howard Ellis, the man who had given me the job. His face was gone, scraped off. His hands held a matchbox, just like mine. Then came the whispers, not like before. These were pleading, help me, Tick. My place just one night, it is not forever. You can leave, I ran. I do not know how long I ran. Time was broken. Space did not feel real. I came to a clearing at the bottom of the tunnel. It was circular. 12 empty chairs stood in a ring. In the center was a mirror, but not a normal one. This mirror showed not your face, but your grave, and the grave I saw was mine. Fresh soil. A coffin lid cracked open, something moving inside. I turned and ran back the way I came, but the tunnel behind me was gone. Only one path remained. Down the tunnel narrowed. I had to crouch now. My palms scraped the dirt as I moved forward, the walls damp and crumbling under my weight. The light from my lantern cast long shadows that danced like things half awake. Behind me, I could still hear the voices. They were not distant anymore. They were crawling after me. I do not know how long I moved through that space. My thoughts no longer held shape. The air down here changed how time worked. Eventually, the ground gave way. One step, and I fell. Not far, but far enough to land hard and crack the lantern. The flame went out. I was in complete darkness, and it was not silent. The ground below breathed. A low inhale, a long exhale. Not wind, not air. Something older than lungs. I reached out in the dark and touched stone. Not carved, not natural. Built. A wall. Then something grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not to hurt, but to show me. I screamed and pulled back. The voice came softly in the dark. Not yours. Yeti lit a match with shaking fingers. The room bloomed in orange light. I was in a circular chamber. The walls were covered in symbols that looked burned into the stone, blackened like soot. Some of them pulsed faintly. 12 alcoves surrounded me, and in each one was a chair and a person. No, not a body. Each slumped figure wore a porcelain mask. Each one bore a number scratched into the forehead, 1 through 12. Only one chair was empty, the one facing me. As the match burned down, a low rumble filled the room. The far wall split open without sound. Beyond, it was a chasm, and within the chasm was the mouth. Not a metaphor, not a hallucination. The stone opened into an impossible wound in the earth. It had teeth, rows and rows of teeth, the size of coffins. And in its throat, I saw them dot bodies, falling, crawling, reaching upward. And not all of them were dead. The mouth did not just eat, it replaced. The wall beside me lit with fire from nowhere, and words appeared, carved deep into the rock. You were chosen to inherit the face to feed the mouth. Thor become part of it. My knees buckled. The lantern flickered back to life on its own, and someone stepped from the shadows. It was me, again, but this version wore the full caretaker's uniform, clean, pressed. His eyes were not black. They were pale blue, just like mine, but there was nothing behind them. He stepped forward and held out the broken mask I had found earlier. He spoke in my voice. It is easier if you put it, Oni refused. He smiled, and for a moment, I saw his teeth were no longer human. They were small replicas of the ones in the mouth. Every tooth a gravestone. He stepped toward me. I ran out through a side passage I had not noticed before. The ground shook behind me. I heard the stone mouths begin to chant. Take the shapekeep, the gate where the name Do Not Wake. I ran through the corridor until I emerged into a new chamber. This one looked like a cathedral, only it had no roof, only stone columns reaching upward into the dark dot. In the center was a pool, still, black, cold. I approached it, thinking maybe it was just water. Then I saw my reflection. It smiled. I did not. The reflection raised its hand before I could react, and pointed behind me. I turned. All 12 masked caretakers were standing in a circle around me. No movement, no sound. They did not breathe. Then, slowly, they raised their hands and pointed to the empty chair. I backed into the edge of the pool. My reflection was gone. Now it was the mouth again, smiling beneath the water, waiting. The 12th figure stepped forward, taller than the rest. It reached up and removed its mask. It was not a person underneath. It was a hollow skull, and inside the skull was a smaller version of my own face, curled like a fetus, eyes wide and open. It whispered, "The name must live in the soil. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The mouth needs a keeper, and the keeper must wear your name." The floor cracked. The pool erupted upward in a geyser of black water and white bone. The 12 figures vanished, and I was alone again. But not alone. Above the water, the mouth began to speak, without sound. Without words, it told me what this place really was. This was not just a cemetery. It was a ledger. A ledger of names, and every name needed a body. If the body escaped, another was chosen. The red door was not an entrance. It was a replacement. I was never hired. I was summoned, and now the debt had come due. The mouth opened wider. The wind howled through the tunnel, carrying voices with it. All of them were me. All of them were screaming. I ran again. This time, not through any tunnel. I closed my eyes and ran straight into the dark, and when I opened them, I was back in the house, standing in the watchtower, the lantern lit, the clock ticking dot for 14 a.m., as if nothing had changed. But outside the window, I saw it, my own face staring back at me from every headstone in the row, and the red door was open again, only this time, I had locked it from the inside. The clock read for 14 a.m. It ticked normally now. The lantern burned with steady light. The cemetery outside looked calm, but I knew the lie. Nothing had been fixed, only reset. I sat in the watchtower and waited. I waited because I no longer trusted movement. Movement made things worse. I remembered what the notebook had said. If you hear a voice, call your name from outside. Do not answer. If you see yourself, run. If you enter the red door, you will not return the same. The red door had never closed again. It stood open in the field, untouched. No wind, no sound, just open, daring me. The house creaked beneath me. This time, not from age, from breath. The house was no longer just wood and plastered. It had begun to breathe. With every breath, I heard the same whisper. Nathan must keep the gate. My name. Always, my name. I left the tower just after 4:30 a.m. and walked the perimeter. The graves had changed again. Where before they had names, then blank stones. Now they bore words, in red. Failed writ turned writ placed. Watching only one still held a name, mine, and below my name. The date had changed now. It listed tomorrow. I knelt in front of my grave and touched the soil. It was warm, soft, freshly turned. I dug a handful loose. Beneath the surface was skin, human skin. It was mine. I saw the scar I got at age 15. It had not scarred like skin. It had scarred like clay, like something sculpted to match me. I staggered back, nauseous. The trees in the distance swayed though. There was no wind. Then I noticed the birds. There were none. Not a single sound in the sky. Just a low hum beneath the earth. I returned to the house and tried the phone again. Still dead. The line gave only static. But then the static shifted. A voice came through. Not shouting. Not crying, just breathing. Then slowly, it spoke. We were never meant to leave. We were never meant to leave. The static did not stop. It came from the walls. Now I turned back toward the front room and saw a figure standing in the doorway. He looked like me, but wrong. His mouth stretched from ear to ear. His hands were tied behind his back with red wire, and his eyes were gone. In their place were two clocks, both frozen at 4:14 a.m. He stepped forward. I backed into the kitchen, grabbing the box of matches and a metal pan of salt I had kept beside the stove. I poured a circle around myself. The thing that wore my face stopped just beyond it. He began to speak, not in words, in images. My childhood bedroom, my father's face, on the day he died. The look I gave the first time I saw my own reflection. The voice returned in my head. The mouth does not feed on flesh, it feeds on memory. It must be reminded of who you are so it can take you apart. I screamed, and threw the match into the salt. A blinding flash erupted, and the figure vanished. But the clock now read for 13 a.m. It was counting backward. The day was no longer moving forward. It was repeating. I checked the windows. The sky never brightened. The horizon stayed dim, like a permanent dusk before dawn. Then, I saw the tower. It had changed. What had been a single room with a chair and lantern was now taller. New levels had formed, each with a door, each marked with a name. I climbed the first door, said Howard Ellis. I opened it. Inside was a hospital room. I recognized it from photos. Howard's mother had died here. She lay in the bed, staring at nothing. Howard sat beside her, whispering into her hand. The room flickered, then darkened, then burned away. Like paper, I opened the second door. Franklin Hodge, the second caretaker, according to the notebook. He sat in a school hallway, holding a broken violin. Children walked past him, faces blank. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. He looked at me and mouthed one word, "Run." The door slammed shut. Each floor told the story of the last man who kept the gate, and each one ended in silence. The 12th door had no name, only a mirror. I stepped inside. The room was empty. Only the mirror stood in the center. I looked into it, saw myself. No mask, no disguise. Only me, and I was screaming. But I heard nothing, only silence. Then the reflection lifted its hand and pointed behind me. I turned. The mouth was there. Here, it was not waiting underground anymore. It had followed me up. That the tower was its spine. Each room a vertebra. Each memory a rib. It was not a place. It was alive. The mouth spoke again, from every surface, every wall, every bone in my back. "You are the last. If you fail, the gate will open and all who wait will return wearing faces that once were yours." Ran down every floor, past every memory, every dead man. The sky outside cracked like glass. The stars fell upward. The stars fell upward. The trees began to bleed. I reached the ground and sprinted toward the cemetery fence. I threw open the gate and found the world outside was gone. No road, no campus, only graves, millions of them, and all bore my name. There was no sky, only ceiling. It arched high above, like stone ribs, stretching over a landscape that had once been open. The trees were statues now, each one shaped like a figure I remembered from my life. Friends, family, strangers, strangers, each face frozen in a scream. I stumbled through them toward what I thought had once been the fence. But the fence was gone. In its place stood a forest of mirrors, tall, jagged, covered in blood. Each one showed me a different version of myself. One wore a noose around his neck. One crawled on all fours, licking the glass. One held his own skin in his hands, peeling it off layer by layer. None of them blinked. None of them stopped smiling. I turned away, but the mirrors moved with me, shifting, sliding, blocking every path. The ground trembled with each step, and then I heard it. Again, the ticking, not just from the clock, from inside me. My chest, my heart, it no longer beat. It ticked, exactly 4 times. Every second, I screamed and tore open my shirt. There was a watch embedded in my skin. Its hands spun backward. When I touched it, I saw memories vanish. My father's voice, my 6th grade teacher's face, the sound of my first dog barking. Gone. In their place were new ones. Dark hallways. Endless graves. The taste of soil, someone else's hands in mine. I stumbled forward, past the mirrors, until I found a clearing. In the center was a table, 12 chairs, each one filled. The masked figures sat still, and at the head of the table sat a 13th. He wore no mask. He wore my face, but older, rotting. Empty. He looked up and spoke in my voice. "Welcome home." I ran at him, fists clenched. I tackled the figure and tore at his face. The skin came away like paper. Beneath it was a mirror. I saw myself again, but not how I was, how I would be, how I was becoming. Then I saw the truth. Every caretaker had been a version of me. Every face, every scream, every grave. The mouth did not choose randomly. It did not hunt. It remembered. It chose from those it had already consumed. Each time I tried to escape, I only ran deeper into myself. There was no cemetery. There was only me. I stood in the clearing, surrounded by every version of myself that had ever existed. Some crying, some laughing. All broken, all kneeling before the 13th. He raised a single hand, and they began to chant. The name must stay. The gate must hold. The mouth must not forget. The blood must circle back. Then the sky fell. It shattered like glass, raining down stars that hissed and burned the ground. From the broken ceiling above, a spiral of limbs descended, hands, arms, fingers. They reached down like roots from the mouth itself. Each one held something: masks, ropes, lanterns, names, mine, over and over again. The hands pulled at me, at my skin, at my eyes. I screamed and ran, dragging my body across the broken earth. I passed a mirror and smashed it with a stone. For a moment, everything stopped. The ticking, the breath, the voice, it all went silent. I broke another. The ground shifted. I ran through the forest, smashing mirror after mirror. Each one cracked the air around me. Each one stole a part of me. I no longer remembered my mother's voice, or what my house looked like, or how old I had been when I first kissed someone, but I remembered something else. The sound of bells, the ones above the graves. They had not rung yet, not since I came back, not since the mouth opened. That meant it was still afraid of something it could not control. I sprinted toward the far end of the cemetery, back to the row, to the marked graves. The salt was gone. The bells were rusted, but they were still here. I grabbed the nearest one and shook it. It screamed like a child. I rang the second, then the third, then the fourth. The ground cracked open. The air turned black. The mouth roared, and from the graves, they began to rise, but not to drag me under, to protect me. Each figure that emerged wore a mask, but not porcelain, not fragile. These were carved from stone, grim, silent, tall. They surrounded me in a perfect circle. Each raised a hand, and the mouth paused. It pulled back. Not far, but enough. The 13th version of me stepped into the light. Again, he looked different now. You should not have remembered. I did not answer. Instead, I stepped forward and took the stone mask from the figure nearest me. I held it in my hands and felt the weight. It was real, not a copy, not a trick, a choice. I could wear it and end this, or I could break it and face what came next. The other masked figures waited. No sound, no movement, just breath. I lifted the mask, and I chose. I placed the mask over my face. It was cold at first, heavy. It pulled on my skin, on my breath, on the memory of who I was. But then it sank in, not like a costume, not like armor. It sank into me like a knife. I saw the forest burn, the graves shiver. The other versions of me shrieked and dropped to their knees. One by one, they turned to ash. The 13th stared at me and did not move. He smiled. Now you understand. The mouth did not scream. It laughed. Its sound came from inside the trees, from underneath the ground, from behind my teeth. The world began to rewind. The blood pulled back into the sky. The shattered mirrors reassembled. The mask on my face tightened. The others vanished. The stone figures disappeared. The 13th version of me stepped into the shadow of the tower and was gone, and I stood alone in the cemetery again. But something was wrong. The graves no longer bore my name. They bore yours, not mine, not any version of me, but someone else. A name I could not say aloud, not because I forgot, but because the mouth would not let me. I tried. My tongue locked. My throat burned. I tried to pull off the mask, but it would not move. It was part of me now. I ran to the gate. The path was still gone. The outside world had not returned. Only fog, endless fog, and within it, something waited, a figure I had never seen before. He stood still, watching. He wore no mask, no name. He looked like he had been here, longer than the dirt, longer than the house. He raised one hand and pointed at my chest. I looked down. The ticking had stopped. The watch was gone, but in its place was a hole. A small circular hole where time had once sat, empty, now hollow. The figure began to walk toward me. I ran. I did not make it far. The fog moved around me like a river around stone. I was back in the watchtower before I realized it. The lantern was out. The windows were dark, and on the desk sat a new notebook. I opened it. The pages were filled with a different handwriting. Not mine, not any of the previous caretakers, but someone else. Each page read the same thing. Let me in, let me in, let me in, let me in. He dropped the book and turned toward the window. The house was no longer alone. Another had appeared, then another, then dozens. A neighborhood, rows of homes with dark windows and crooked chimneys, each with a tower, each with a graveyard, each with a caretaker. The mouth was no longer beneath one field. It was beneath them all, and they were waking. Every house had a red door. Every house had someone inside wearing a version of my face. And now I understood. I was not the last. I was the first. The beginning of a pattern that would never end, because the mouth did not live in one place. It lived in repetition. It lived in ritual. It lived in stories that looped so tightly they strangled the truth. The mask cracked just slightly, enough for one word to slip out. No, it echoed. It bled. It hurt, but it broke something. The world shimmered. The walls of the tower turned to salt, and the cemetery began to burn. Not from fire, but from light. Real light. Dawn. Actual. Golden dawn. The first I had seen since stepping through the red door, and the mouth screamed. For the first time, it screamed. The sky turned black. The light split it open, and I saw what hid inside. Not a creature, not a god, but a shape, something like a heart with 1,000 arms. Each arm reaching for a different name, different person, each one wearing a mask. Some willingly, some not. It saw me. It knew I could see it, and that terrified it, because now it knew I would not forget. I removed the mask. This time it let go. It shattered in my hand, and with it, so did the tower, the graves, the trees. All of it peeled away, like wet paper. And I was standing in the middle of the road again. No fog, no red door, no gate, just silence, and a single bell hanging from a tree. Branch, still ringing, still alive. I walked, not to escape, but to find where the mouth would grow next, because it was not finished, and neither was I. The road was longer than I remembered. Trees flanked either side, but they had no roots. They swayed without wind. Each branch pointed east. I followed. The town I had come from, if it had ever been real, was gone. In its place were roads with no signs, homes with no windows, and people who did not speak. They looked at me with recognition, or something worse, as if I were a photograph from a forgotten drawer, as if they had buried me once and never told anyone. The mouth was not done with me. It had sent echoes forward, into this place, into these people, and now it was building again. I saw a girl sitting on a porch. Her eyes were clouded white. She held a mirror in her lap. In it, I saw the red door just floating. No frame, no house, just a door standing in the middle of a field, and a line of people, walking toward it. Each of them wore a mask, some stone, some paper, some made of hands. I stepped closer. The girl spoke without looking up. You left something open, where she pointed to the sky. I looked up, and I saw it. A tear, a wide, bleeding gash in the clouds. Through it, something turned slowly. A wheel of faces, each one stretched, silent, spinning endlessly. The mouth had no center now. It had become movement. Ritual. Every forgotten house, every untold story, every grave without a name. It fed on repetition, and it had learned to grow roots. Without soil, I walked 4 miles before I found the door again, just as she said, standing alone in a field. The ground around it was scorched. Ashes, in a perfect circle. No hinges, no handle, only one thing. Only one thing. A word scratched into the wood. Remember. I approached. The closer I came, the more my skin burned. Not from heat, from memory. Everything I had forgotten came back at once. Faces I had let go of. Voices I had drowned out. A name, I had not spoken in years. My name, Nathaniel Graves. I said it aloud, and the world flinched. The door cracked from the other side. I heard someone breathing, then footsteps, then a voice. "You are not supposed to be here." I recognized it. Not mine, not the 13th version of me, but the one before him. The original, the first caretaker. The one who opened the mouth long before I was born. He stepped through. He wore no eyes, only black pits. His fingers were long and wrong, and his mouth stretched to his ears. He smelled like rust and soil. He looked at me and tilted his head. "You broke the pattern." I had no answer. He stepped aside, and behind him was the house rebuilt, empty, waiting, but it was not the same. This one had no tower, no cemetery, only walls that pulsed like lungs. The mouth had evolved. No more masks, no more watchers. It had become the house itself, and the house knew. I was not ready. I stepped through the door. The floor disappeared. There was no weight, no sound, only rooms, endless rooms. Each one held a version of me, sleeping, dying, waking. In one, I was a child. In another, I was old. In another, I was still screaming. The house whispered, "Every time you remember you, make it stronger. Every time you resist you, help it grows. Top remembering and it will die." I dropped to my knees. I had fought so long to hold on to who I was. Now it begged me to let go. But that was the trick. The mouth did not feed on memory. It fed on silence. It grew where people stopped telling stories. It thrived where pain was buried. It lived in what we refused to name. I stood, and I spoke. I told my story. Out loud, room by room, version by version. Even when it hurt. Even when I forgot what was real. I spoke. I remembered. And the walls began to crack. The house shook. The rooms burned. The first caretaker screamed and melted into the floor. The red door flung itself off its hinges and vanished into the dark, and the mouth screamed one final time. Not from pain, from fear, because it could no longer hide, it could no longer bury. I walked out of the last room and found myself in a field again. The girl was gone. The mirror was broken, but the sky had healed. The tear had closed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I heard birds. Real birds, not bells, not whispers, not masks, just mourning. I sat down and waited, not for the mouth, not for another version of me, but for silence. True silence. And I knew what had to come next. The final step, the last name, the last story. I waited for the sun to rise fully, not just over the hills, over me, over the places I had seen, over the wounds I still carried. And when it did, something changed. Not around me, inside me. The ticking did not return. The mouth did not whisper, but a silence deeper than either settled in my chest. I was empty, clean, and yet I knew it was not over, because something was still buried. Not beneath the house, not in the graves, in me. A name, one I had never said, not even in dreams. Not even in memories. The name of the thing that opened the mouth. The name it had worn before it turned into a wheel of faces, and a red door, and a house that could breathe. I walked until the earth cracked. Not a path, not a road, just a tear in the dirt, wide enough to swallow me whole. It led to a valley where nothing lived. No trees, no wind, just stones, stacked in spirals. At the center stood a stone slab, flat, unmarked. But I knew what it was. The first grave. Older than the first house. Older than the first caretaker. I knelt beside it and placed my palm on the stone. It was cold and wet, and it pulsed. A voice rose from beneath it. Not like before. No trick, no mask. Just words. Familiar, because they were mine. Every word I had buried in silence, every secret I had pretended not to remember. They returned now, One by one, the girl I had left behind, the brother I never spoke to again, the time I saw something in the woods and told no one, the silence I mistook for peace. It all returned, it all had weight, it all had blood, and from within the grave, something opened its eyes, a shape, not monstrous, not divine, just a man, thin, tired, wearing my hands. He looked up and asked me the question I had feared the most. Why did you let it grow? Could have lied, I could have run, but I stayed, and I answered, because forgetting is easier, because stories are heavy, because remembering hurts. He smiled, and then he wept, not because of pain, but relief. He stood, and I saw that he was not a ghost, not a shade. He was what I had locked away when I first stepped into the WATCHTOWER, the part of me that refused to forget, the part the mouth feared most. He reached into the grave and pulled out a book, bound in leather, pages blank. I took it. As I did, the valley shifted. The sky cracked again, but not from darkness, from light. It poured down like fire. The spiral stones burned. The red door reappeared, melting into ash, and the mouth rose one last time. No masks, no eyes, just a wound in the shape of a question it had never asked before. What are you? I stepped forward. I opened the book, and I answered, I am the name you cannot. Take am the voice that remembers. I am the story you failed to bury on. I began to write. Every name, every scream, every hour in the tower, every mask broken, every mirror smashed. I wrote it all, not to be read, not to be shared, but to be real. And with each word, the mouth crumbled, its shape led away, its breath stuttered, its limbs turned to dust, because it could not survive a complete story. It fed on fragments, on denial, on silence, and I gave it none. I closed the book, and the world returned. Not just the field, not just the sky, but everything. I stood on a real road now, trees with roots, homes with laughter, people with names. I had not escaped the mouth. I had killed it, because I remembered what it was before it had a name, before it had power. It was just a silence, passed down to long pain left to rot in the dark, and now it was gone, not just buried, named, and that is the difference. I walked until I saw a child playing in the grass. She wore no mask. She had no shadow waiting behind her eyes. She looked at me and smiled. Do you live around here? I looked at her. At the world she still had, and I answered, not yet. She ran off, and I sat down beneath a tree, the book still in my hands, and I knew what the final page would say. Tell this to no one, bet. Never forget, because remembrance is not always a story. Sometimes it is a weight, sometimes it is a fire, but it is always a shield, and I will carry it until someone else must.